Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Fraser O'Leary. This is the Educator Practice Committee of the DC State Board of Education. And we're going to begin our meeting by talking to Scott Goldstein, who is the Director of Empower Ed, and is going to talk to us today about teacher retention, and we're making that a broad definition. And this is being recorded, so people will have this available to them. But I want to begin, and I know that there are several members who are going to join in a little bit. And so since it's recorded, they'll be able to see it and talk to that too, Scott. So if you'd like to begin, thank you so much for coming and for everything that you do.
Thank you, Representative O'Leary, and thank you for having me, everyone. So yeah, thanks for having me. Excited to be here to talk about teacher retention in DC. This is obviously core to the mission of our organization, Empower Ed, and I know the State Board of Education too, and something you've worked on for many years now. And we're really grateful for all the work that the State Board has done over the past 4 or 5 years, in particular on teacher turnover and teacher retention. So I want to start, I'll just go through some slides with a little bit of a landscape of where we are currently on teacher retention, a little bit of a history of some of the work the State Board has done that we appreciate and the recommendations that have been made over time. And just kind of to start off the discussion, maybe to prompt where we are now on some of those things that have been recommended over time, and then throw out what Empower Ed's recommendations are. And if we have time, I can highlight a little bit about what our work is in this area as well. So I'm going to share my screen. Oh, I need screen sharing permission.
Give it a try again.
Okay. There we go. All right. So I'll start here, which is just the landscape, which we all know in what the cost is to us of teacher retention. And what this graphic is just showing is the difference between where DC is because of our numbers in teacher retention and the average urban school district. So as members know, we have anywhere between 25 and 30% based on the State Board's reporting and OSSE's teacher workforce reporting either 25 or 30% annual teacher turnover at the school level over the past several years. And the average urban school district has 16 to 19% average turnover. So what you're looking at the top is the cost to us. This is based on the Learning Policy Institute teacher turnover cost calculator. The cost to DC of teacher turnover estimated at about $20,000 a teacher, and you can see what that's based on. And then the cost on the bottom is what it would cost us if we had the turnover of an average urban school district. And so what you can see is over that time period, that's a $40 million difference that DC is wasting compared to if we had the average turnover of an urban school district. That's not eliminating turnover. That's just if we had average urban turnover. So I'm going to talk about the pandemic dip and the pandemic bump. I know you've talked about this a little bit, but this is really important. We saw in the past year, last year in particular, from school year 1920 to 2021, a dip in teacher turnover, meaning an increase in teacher retention. That was totally predicted. We expected that to happen. And the reason we expected that was it was almost impossible for someone to change jobs in the midst of the pandemic. It was impossible to move. It was almost impossible for people to interview and change jobs. The pandemic created a really unstable environment for people to make a life shift. So it became very, very difficult for anyone to make a work shift, even if they wanted to do that or to explore a new school change last year. And so what we saw last year, predictably, was that more people stayed put. In the midst of that, they also had the change in most cases to virtual learning, which meant most teachers were going to see how that went in the virtual environment, right, during the pandemic. And because of all those life circumstances, it was very difficult for people to make a change. So we saw a dip in teacher turnover. Obviously, there was some movement within LEAs, obviously, more within DCPS, for example, but we saw a dip in turnover. Then what we expected to see, and I think what we have seen, is a significant bump in turnover between school year 2021 and school year 21-22 now. And I can tell you from having conversations with the folks at DCPS that we've talked to over the past week, that DCPS has told us that they have experienced very high turnover from last school year to this current school year, and that it is higher than they've seen in a long time. And so in addition to seeing historically high turnover over this past year, they also have seen a very high number of fall departures during the school year this fall. They have a very high shortage. They had, when I last checked, about 160 positions unfilled in DCPS. And I know WTU has some numbers on that. In addition to that, there's a sub shortage, which has been reported on. And so there is a shortage now that DCPS has not seen for a while. They are upfront about their challenges in recruitment, and also upfront about the fact that this means retention has to be even more of a priority because they're having a recruiting challenge right now because of the pandemic, and that they understand that people, a lot of people don't feel safe at work, and there's things we have to do obviously to address that. It's something we've been critical of and want to address. But we should expect to see, when we see official numbers, which DCPS says they will release before the teacher turnover hearing before the DC Council in December, that we're going to see a high level of turnover from last year to this year. I wanted to look at, and if you have a question, feel free to just stop me at any point, but I will obviously, we'll have time at the end. This is a snapshot from a state board report a couple years ago.
I'm sorry, Scott. I'm going to interrupt you a little bit because
Go for it.
I was on mute. When you said very high turnover, what are you talking about as far as a percentage?
They did not tell me the percentage. What they told me is higher than they've seen in a long time.
Okay, and higher than they've seen in a long time has to be over 25%.
Yeah,
right?
I can only guess, and they told me, I think the same thing probably they've told you or others, which is they're not going to, even
They
though
haven't told me anything, but
they have not, that they're only going to submit the numbers before the hearing to the council, which is happening in December. So that's the first time I think we expect to see the actual number, but they were candid that it was high.
But they have the numbers, right?
They told me that they calculated it last week.
Okay, so they have the numbers.
That's my understanding.
And it's not brain surgery to think that you can, every principal knows who's in their building.
Right. Right. I mean, obviously at the school level, people knew this since school started. Yeah.
Also, you said 160 jobs are unfulfilled. Is that DCPS number?
That's the latest number that I had from WTU as of a couple weeks ago. Yeah.
And so that means that the classes are bigger?
So those are unfilled positions, which means people have to make school level decisions about whether a different person is filling that, whether there's bigger class sizes or how they're covering that.
And the other thing is you mentioned substitutes, which is that it's not even a critical mass. It's way past that now. Yeah. Because the substitutes are not even willing to be, and they've dipped into the offices at DCPS, I think, for
yes, central office.
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so I know both that principals and assistant principals are frequently being asked to sub and are in classes. And you can imagine principals have an incredibly stressful job right now. They're being asked to do contact tracing and a lot of COVID protocols on top of their jobs. But in addition to that, a lot of them are literally in classes with students for full days, not infrequently right now, because they don't have subs and trying to do their job as principals. So that's happening. In addition, I do know that central office staff have been asked to sub when it's needed. So yeah, they're I think it's fair to say they're desperate for subs.
Thanks. I'm gonna have to get off for a second. I've got to.
Okay. So so just wanted to go through a tiny bit of this history, which is that from 2018, which is when the state board first did its report on with the Mary Levy report. I think that was the first commission one, and correct me if I'm wrong, but and the state board really generated a lot of attention around this around the numbers that were generated around teacher turnover and showing how high it was comparable to other cities. And then this timeline, which is this is from one of the state board reports, I think in 2019 or 2020, of the timeline of the state board's work on this. And of course, one of the things that I wanted to highlight here is that the state board and Empower Ed, we co-sponsored this forum. This is 3 years ago. I think it's three, maybe it's 4, I think 3 years ago, on teacher and principal retention. This brought out really an impressive group of, I think, somewhere between 100 and 150 community stakeholders, from students to teachers, principals, DCPS, the Deputy Mayor of Education's office, state board members, and others represented, to think about a solutions-oriented conversation around this. And so when we had this forum, the State Board and Empower Ed, 3 years ago, we really were solutions-oriented in thinking about how do we solve the teacher retention crisis. And I just wanted to highlight this memo from December 19, 2018. So we're talking about 3 years ago, that the State Board put out following this, when the State Board and Empower Ed worked together to digest what we learned from that meeting, and then set forward these 4 recommendations. One had to do with logistics and human resources, and you'll see this summarized in a minute, which was really 2 things: improving professional development, and then incentive-based programs like student loans and housing stipends and benefits. The second was distributed leadership, promoting more shared and distributed leadership. The third being capturing teacher retention data, which the State Board has really followed through on. And then the fourth here being reducing the emphasis on high stakes testing, and thinking about competency-based waivers for high stakes testing. So those were 4 recommendations that we made together after that teacher and principal retention forum 3 years ago. And this I put together here, I put together a kind of chart of all the recommendations the State Board has made on teacher turnover over the past 4 years, from the 2018 post forum through all the reports, the 4 reports, including the teacher survey report, and the 3 reports, I think, on teacher turnover that Mary Levy has done. These are all the recommendations that have been made in each of those reports. I put question marks because I don't know the status of many of those things. I know the one that has been very concrete is that capture annual data in the statewide data warehouse has resulted in the State Board proposing legislation to the DC Council, which is still waiting on a second hearing on in this council cycle for the council to move ahead on. But I did want to kind of raise awareness that the State Board has made a lot of recommendations over the past 4 years, very specifically, some of them with Empower Ed after that forum 3 years ago, that I think could really make a difference on teacher retention. But I think there's a lot of room for this committee, for the State Board, to drill down on these specifically, maybe pick some of them and follow through on some very specific recommendations where we could make a big difference. Because I think all of these have great potential, but the devil's in the details. For example, I know Representative O'Leary, you care a lot about the mentorship programs. We've talked about that a lot. But there are really great mentorship programs, and then there are not great mentorship programs that districts create. And so, having a full-throated discussion around exactly what kind of mentorship program should DCPS create, would be really useful. I know there's been a lot of discussion around impact and the AU study that's come out. We do a lot of work around shared leadership. How can we reform teacher PD? So there's a lot of work potentially that could be done here. But this is kind of, you can see how much the State Board has done over time on this. And then this is our agenda, which we did a workshop on and a webinar on recently. But these are the 6 areas where we've recommended changes around teacher retention. One is your Data Warehouse Amendment Act before the council, but also I don't think that it mandates, you can correct me if I'm wrong, that there's a universal exit survey across both sectors that would be required to be done, and we want to see that added. The second part is that we do school-based work on building trust and shared leadership between teachers and administrators, which we think is really imperative. And also that principals need professional development on shared leadership, teacher wellness, on improving teacher working conditions, but not uniform PD. And I know the State Board has suggested kind of statewide PD on this, but we do think it's important that it's tailored to the individual schools, because I can talk more about the kind of work we're doing now on this. but schools have very unique challenges on this. And I don't think it's great to have OSCE come up with a universal PD administered kind of top down on that. The third one is teacher evaluation reform. We favor shifting to peer assistance and review, which is the kind of system they have in Montgomery County, which is, and a lot of other places, which shifts to a growth-based system instead of a punitive accountability kind of system where impact is. And then I'll talk about the floating PD in a second, but basically we do a lot of asset mapping work with schools that we work with, where they're highlighting, really our goal is teachers are all leaders, but they all want to lead in different ways. Not every teacher wants to have some kind of formal teacher leadership role, right? Some teachers love that. They want to have the kind of leap role or some kind of official title or department chair, but not every teacher wants that. For some people, they really just want to be respected for their expertise in their field, for their expertise in their content area. For some people, they're really great with technology and they wish they could share that expertise with their their colleagues. So what we do in our school-based work is help the schools identify the expertise and the passions of every individual teacher and make them feel appreciated for their individual assets and expertise and passions, and help share that expertise with the whole staff to improve their own self-efficacy, feelings of competence and self-efficacy, but also retention. Number 4 is spend in the right places. We have a charter sector where 50% of schools have a starting salary that's below a living wage. That's a major issue. And DCPS, where although the starting salaries are high, there's a big emphasis on bonuses, which is a lot of research says is not an effective way to use money to retain teachers. And then we support, new teacher mentorships, teacher leaderships that go beyond just kind of department chairs or coaching, other leadership opportunities, especially for educators of color, and then flexible scheduling, which is really important, and some schools do. And it's incredibly important for keeping teachers as they become parents, where a lot of teachers drop out of the profession because it becomes unmanageable time-wise. And flexible scheduling is a great way to keep teachers in that critical stage. And then focus on educators of color. We've done this work on closing the gap with Latino and Latina educators, and then grow your own programs, where we had success with advocacy last year. So I'll just go through a couple more things and then stop for questions, unless you want to stop me now.
Now go on.
So benefits of floating professional development. What floating professional development means is teachers learn from other experts in the field. So this means just like teachers have personal leave days or sick days, they would be guaranteed days for them to learn from other teachers, whether in their building or at other schools, based on personal goals that they've set. So they say, I really want to learn how to differentiate instruction, or I really want to learn as someone, who's excellent at, classroom organization or using technology in the classroom. They identify other educators who are really great at that. They set some professional learning goals. They have dedicated time off to go learn from them, to observe other teachers, to learn from other teachers, and to bring that work back to their own school. We can talk more about that. I'm not going to go into this now, but I have a bunch of slides in here that show what our work is like in school. And so if you want to go through this, and I'm happy to answer questions, this is just what some of the virtual work looks like that we do with schools to help guide schools through. For example, in this one, how much autonomy do teachers need versus how much support do they need individually? How do you asset map which teacher and educator and staff member has instructional and non-instructional expertise that can be shared? And there's a lot more there, but I'll stop there for questions and discussion.
Emily is on now. Emily, do you have any questions? I thought she was on now. I do have a question, Scott, about
I'm here, sorry. Go ahead, though. I'm sorry, I couldn't find the right thing. But go ahead, Fraser, and I can.
but you've been on you've heard what Scott was talking about. Do you have any questions?
Sure, hold on. Sorry.
You're not muted.
Go ahead, Fraser.
Have you got two computers on at the same time? That's why it sounds like you're in.
All right, I figured it out. Sorry. Hi, thanks, Scott. And sorry I was late. And sorry if I ask a question that you already answered during the time I wasn't here, but just going backwards, actually, the floating PD. So how would you mentioned that teachers would identify a teacher in another school that, you know, seems to have mastered something that they want to learn. How would they identify that teacher? Like, will there be some kind of directory that you would create, or and who would be responsible for keeping that up? Because I think it just seems logistically challenging, like with turnover and teachers moving from school to school and all of that. So yeah, I was just curious about that.
So there are systems, when systems really care about shared leadership, they actually create databases to do this at a system-wide level. So you'd have principals actually doing asset mapping regularly at their own schools and submitting this information in a place where people could see in a pretty dynamic way. And people are, kind of get bragging rights around it, right? Like they're saying themselves, this is something I'm really good at, but they're saying it not just because they're saying it, because they are saying it, because their principal is also saying it, because their instructional coach is saying it. So these are collaborative conversations where they're identifying people in their school who are really good at a particular skill set. And the school is then identifying, right, folks who are really good at particular instructional skills or non-instructional skills. And then folks would be able to see that across schools. This can also be done inside a school at a school level where folks are just observing other teachers, right, within the building. And they would do the same thing where they have the hours to do that.
Yeah, the in-school part makes total sense to me, but I guess I'm wondering, so would there be, I guess there would be like a platform of some kind, a digital platform.
Exactly.
where principals would enter or teachers could enter information, and then
yeah, there are places where there are places where the district would run that, right, or does run that, and there are places where it's just a totally volunteer teacher thing. Like you can submit yourself on here, right? Like you can upload that, like, this is something I'm great at. Do you want to learn it from me? Here's my class schedule, right? And you can make yourself available for it. So it can be kind of a grassroots thing, or it can be run by the district.
Do you know if this has been done?
Yes, our teacher team 2 years ago did a bunch of research on it, and I can ask them about what they have.
Okay, and I just have one more related question, actually. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Fraser. If you
we did it at Cardozo.
Within the school, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's the best way for it to work.
Yeah.
Where if Scott and I were teaching in the same school and Scott was really good at lesson plans and I was really not very good at lesson plans, I would just go, but there would be it has to be a culture shift in the building. It's got to come from the leadership.
Yeah.
And they have to be comfortable with teachers sharing those kinds of leaderships. Like Scott said, there are teachers that like to be leaders, and there are teachers that just aren't leaders, even though they're teachers.
Right.
I mean, you go to a faculty meeting and there are teachers that in a faculty meeting every month for the whole year, there are teachers who haven't ever said a word.
But I would say, I think that doesn't mean they don't want to be appreciated for what they're good at, right? So like, I think that's how this kind of system helps, is like, if you ask everybody what they're good at, and then you actually make space for them to show it off and to help each other. I think that's what we don't do well, is we don't make space for them to teach each other, for educators to help each other, because we fill it all up with things that are scripted. And teachers learn best from each other, and they trust each other because they work with each other, they know each other. So educators are the best teachers of other educators. They trust each other, and you can create a formal structure for this, but not micromanage it.
Because when they're setting up PD, the way to kill a PD is to have somebody from someplace else come into your building. Like you were talking earlier about the unique sense of every school. All right. Somebody comes in from someplace else. They get paid money to come and lead a PD, and they're turned up and no one's listening to them because they don't have a feel for the building. It's just like, you know your own children better than anybody else does, hopefully.
Yeah.
But that's what's so important about mentoring.
Yeah.
Is that mentoring we're teachers. That's what we get paid to do, is teach.
Yeah.
So mentoring is just teaching somebody else. But
Right. And
if the system doesn't accept mentoring as being important.
And that's why I think, I would love to see some kind of, formal recommendation on what kind of mentorship program we should adopt. Because I do think my fear is that we could see a push for mentorship and it become a very overly scripted top-down mentorship program, right? And that wouldn't be good either, because there is a lot of research that there are a lot of mentorship programs run by districts that fail because they're kind of arranged marriages, right? The school set up here, partner with this person, and there's they don't have trust, they don't have a relationship with that person. But if you set up a structure and incentivize teachers to work together and form their own partnerships with educators that they know and respect, everybody has teachers in the building who they want to learn from, right? And there's the educator who you share a classroom with, or who's in the classroom across the hallway, who you've seen do that incredible thing, and you really wish you had a free period just to sit there and watch them. And that's the kind of thing we need to be making space for, but we don't. So I do think we don't want to just leave that to chance, though, right? It would be great if we created a recommendation for what it would look like to create a structure for doing that kind of mentorship program, but not overly prescribed.
Yeah, I agree completely. Because mentorship works if there's buy-in from both the mentor and the mentee.
Right.
And if you structure it so that the mentor is the sage on the stage and the mentee, who is a teacher or a principal, same thing with principals and assistant principals, there has to be an equality of wanting to learn. Alistair, welcome.
Thank you. Good to see you both. And Mr. Goldstein, I apologize for missing the bulk of your presentation, and we'll be sure to tune in to the recording and catch up. But thank you for being with us.
Great to see you.
Do we have 5 more minutes, or do you have to jump now?
I have 10 minutes, yeah.
Oh, cool. Okay. Well, I guess, what I am hoping to get a sense of before you have to leave is just what, we could do to just build on the work we've done, the work you've done to advance some of these areas that you've pointed out. The state board has already been working on, or has made recommendations about.
Scott has all that on his slide presentation that he had that we can share.
Oh, did I miss
everybody.
it?
Yeah,
Okay.
all of that part. And also, Scott, if you could go back for Emily and Alistair and just go over the first slide when you were talking about the dip and the bump.
Sure.
Thank you, Fraser.
What I was talking about here is that, we expected at the beginning of the pandemic in school year 1920 to 2021 that there would be a big dip in turnover, that people would stay put. And we expected that because in the midst of a pandemic, it's hard to move. Literally, physically, it's hard for people to move. It's hard for people to interview at a new school. The pandemic made it very difficult to change jobs, right, and make a life change. So we expected the turnover to go down. We also expected that the year following that, that we knew from morale numbers, both locally and nationally, that teacher morale was at an all-time low, even though turnover was low. And so we expected that there would be a big bump a year later. And that's exactly what we've seen, which is that from school year 2021 to 21-22, where we are now, we've seen incredibly high turnover. And, have confirmation from DCPS that they've noticed a big spike in turnover compared to recent years, from last year to this year. We're also seeing shortages where DCPS has really never had shortages in certain areas. And so, we're seeing that big bump, in turnover, unfortunately, this year. So there's just a lot of continued work to do here.
And I just want to mention what I had asked Scott about. If it's a bump that's bigger than anything in recent years, then it's probably over 30%, which is got to be the highest in the country, since we were at 25% or 26%, if I remember correctly, at one couple of years ago, and it was the highest in the country.
Yeah, I don't know what the percentage is and they haven't said, but it's also DCPS was trending down. So it could be back up to that, what it was before when
Right.
they say highest in recent years. So I don't know exactly what they mean by that. So I don't know that it's gone that high. I guess we'll see when they release the numbers, but it does seem it's gone up, right? From recent years. But, you know, I wouldn't be surprised that it's gone a lot higher. But I think the bigger area here is that we're seeing shortages where we haven't seen them in a while. And they're saying themselves they're having trouble recruiting where they haven't for a while. And so, you know, they've acknowledged, I think this is an opportunity, right? Because there's been a fight about retention in the city for a long time about, are we just losing bad teachers? Maybe that's a good thing, right? Or is this a real crisis, right, on teacher retention? And I think it's really time to put that argument aside, because no company would accept that it's okay to lose a third of your people or 25-30% of your people and you don't have a culture problem, right? So I think we have gotten an agreement, because of a lot of work the state board and others have done, that we do have a problem with teacher turnover. We need to do something about it. I think it's really time to move past what the problem is and move to a new page of what we're doing about it. And like I identified in this chart, you know, the state board over all these years, here we go, has made all these recommendations. Over the past 4 years, the state board has made a ton of recommendations about teacher retention. Empower Ed has made a lot of recommendations about teacher retention. We're trying to follow through on all of those. You know, we have discussed in recent years whether there's different levels here. There's things we want schools to do, right? There's things that the state board has power to do. Although I know limited. There's things that the council would have the power to do. There's things principals and OSSI have the power to do, for example. So really getting to the point where we're categorizing and working collaboratively, state board, WTU, Empower Ed, other groups that are invested in this, principals union, others groups that are invested in this, to come up with, here's all the recommendations. Let's get specific about it, right? Here's the ones that are for OSSI. Here's the ones that are for DCPS. Here's the ones that the council could take action on. We know we have the Data Warehouse Amendment Act, but, you know, I would just keep urging us to work together to get really specific about some of these solutions and follow through, because I think there's an opportunity. I think they are acknowledging this is something real that they have to confront now.
And that's the first time.
Go ahead, Alistair.
Mr. Goldstein, is there a centralized effort right now across the agencies that's working on this that you know of?
I know that the deputy mayor for education has been having conversations with the different agencies about what to do about recruitment and retention. I know they are, I know they've been having, because I've been having conversations, and as I talk to them, many of them have mentioned that the deputy mayor has been having conversations with them. So I know that they're doing that. And I also know now I would say the deputy mayor has not engaged us on it. But I know that the deputy mayor of education also is hosting some public forums or forums for teachers and others on it. But I wouldn't say it's like a coordinated approach across all the agencies right now. But there is some feedback kind of gathering, I guess.
Because everything that you've listed out here is not a simple fix, right?
Right. Yeah.
And it's not one of the acronyms alone that can fix it.
Yeah.
Right. So part of what I imagine the challenge for us that's uniquely perhaps DC challenge is making sure that we can get the various actors who would be involved with the solution to be working towards it together rather than separately. And I don't know, this is something, I think that's something that, you know, Representative O'Leary and Representative Gassoy, we may want to think about trying to convene from the SBOE side, the various stakeholders to think about this together. But thank you. I think these are it's a particularly difficult time for our students to have their teachers come in and out as well, right? So the urgency is very high, and I think even the solution I just proposed is very slow.
Yeah, and I appreciate that. You know, I think when we did that forum 3 years ago that SBOE and Empower Ed co-sponsored, that really was kind of that, because we had all the agencies at tables together. We had at each table, if you don't mind me taking this off, we had each table, we had, you know, people from, I think we gave stickers. So there was like people from different agencies and policy, people at each table, along with students, teachers, principals. So there was a mix of each agency and each kind of stakeholder at each table to come up, brainstorm solutions together, and then put it all together. It'd be great to do that kind of thing again, checking about where we are. But I love the idea of SBOE, you know,
Is
convening.
that something we could do as our committee?
Yeah.
Right.
And that's
We could
something that
reconvene.
that's something we would want to do before December, when the council has their teacher retention hearing.
Yeah.
That's a great idea, Alistair.
Alistair, I just wanted to say to your point about being a difficult time for students, that this is, you know, I think we have to ground in that about teacher retention, right? I was having a conversation with someone about this afternoon, that this is about two things, right? This is about, you know, stability has a human cost, right, to the instability, right? Our students have enough instability in their lives, any of them, and we kind of feel that, you know, some people are entitled to that stability, I guess, and some people are not. Many of us grew up with having teachers consistently from pre-K, kindergarten, who were still there when we graduated school, or still in the school district and teaching, who could write our college recommendations. And some people don't get the chance to grow up with that, right? And the people aren't there 3 or 4 years later. And makes a big difference personally, as mentors in their lives, their ability to go to college and have that recommendation letter, but just, you know, as guides for them through the educational process, right? And I think we should view that as a right of students to have those adult role models in their lives and have that stability in their lives. And also the second part, beyond that importance on the human level, is that it's really impossible for schools to make consistent progress over time if the people keep turning over every year.
Oh, yeah, no question.
May I ask one more thing while we have you, Mr. Goldstein?
Sure.
I'm curious, in your work, if you've been finding that what the role is of, I mean, we've acknowledged the complexity of the education stakeholders alone, but once we move beyond that, right? I mean, currently we've been putting, you know, at the middle school I visited recently, it's the PE teacher who's now taking care of COVID stuff, right? Because the nurses aren't taking that on. So how much of the role, I mean, the pushback I hear in Ward 2 from a lot of educators is we keep adding things on our plate.
Yeah.
So how do we work with other agencies to help take away some of that, right? Because the educators are at their max. We're putting everything on top of them again. And so there's a lot that we can do across education stakeholders, but I actually think part of the solution is bringing in, you know, DC Health and other players as well to take things off of educators' plates. And I don't know where you are in that work.
Well, those are important ideas. We need more people in the buildings right now. There's too much being put on teachers. There's too much being put on the principals. We need more people in the buildings, right? And I've been in DC education for, about 15, maybe 18 years, something. And I have never seen teachers this stressed or overburdened in my time. I don't know, Fraser's been in it much longer. I have never seen this level of feeling overwhelmed, and levels of disengagement, levels of, I can't take care of myself. And, it's really heartbreaking this year. And I think we didn't see it coming in some ways, because people felt like everything was going to be fine last spring and we were going to have a normal school year. And then suddenly we didn't, and everybody adapted on the fly. And now everybody's doing 10 jobs at once. And I think because of that, people just have way too much on their plate. So yes, absolutely. Whoever we can bring in to help in our schools right now to take things off their plates, because teachers feel like they don't have the time to teach.
And the thing about it is Alistair and Scott and Emily, is you're talking about teachers. Okay. Now think about being a principal. All right. and just multiply what Scott just said by 10 or by infinity, because the principals are doing things they've never thought about doing that they have to do because they don't allow. There has to be a communal effort by the government to understand the emergency that the schools are in. And it's really, I mean, just to deviate a little bit, the safe passage is another thing that we've been talking about in our committee. And the mayor came out with a whole bunch of safe passage stuff today. Y'all probably saw the memo from John Paul. All right, the mayor came out with these. It's not a coincidence that today they're having the safe passage hearing at the council, and the mayor came out with a bunch of regulations about how they're going to build new this and new byways and so for safety. But we have to make the public know that this is an emergency. Teachers should be able to teach. That's what we were trained to do. All right. It doesn't mean that you're not a father, a mother, a big brother, a big sister, an aunt, an uncle, a grandfather, grandmother, all those other relatives, all those other caregivers for your students. That's part of the job. But it ought to be sort of voluntarily you're doing those kinds of things rather than mandated that you got to do this and that. And there are a
Can
lot
I
of
jump?
lot of
Sorry, I know you
principals-
have to run.
Yeah, I
a lot
gotta
of principals are
do.
teaching all day in classes, if you can believe it.
I apologize, guys. I have to go. Thank you guys so much for
Okay,
having me.
thank
I
you
look
so
forward to
much,
following
Scott.
up.
And
That
you-
was so helpful.
Just to put in your head, like to prioritize some of the things on that list, to go back to my question, which actually I think I had seen that slide, but what I wanted to say is we can't do all these things at once, or should we? Do we need to? So that's my question really. So, okay,
Thanks.
Thank you
thank
very
you.
much.
Thanks so much for coming. Hi, guys.
Hey, so that was, it's nice seeing you all again.
Yeah, I know, it's-
Ebony Rose said she was gonna come. You got a haircut, Alistair.
Finally.
So did I. But that was very helpful, especially the numbers. That was what was most important to me about this is a critical time in our city in education. If there are 160 vacancies, Alistair.
Yeah.
160
unfortunately,
vacancies in
it's true.
DCPS.
Part of it is, how we're, part of it is, it's exacerbated and amplified by how difficult the job market is generally right now, I think, to hire. It's not just schools that are having a really hard time hiring. So
Everything
No,
is
the
scrambled.
thing
we've
is
got a
the
lot of
people
problems
have
to-
the people have left the schools since the beginning of school to make a vacancy. So you're talking
Right.
about, okay, what do you do then? But why did someone leave from August to October?
Right.
And-
What I'm saying is, yes, I would love to think about what our next steps are in terms of what we could convene by before December, like you said, right?
Yeah, I agree.
But I'm saying that, the library is facing a similar challenge, for example, with staffing, right? And so are so many other private companies as well. And so, within the context of a very tough job market right now, I think we're making it's even more difficult for educators. And I linked a letter from the War II Ed Council, because at the last
Yeah, I
meeting
saw that.
we had principals talk to us about principal burnout, which is what you were mentioning, Representative O'Leary, and it's something that's been really top of mind for me in my ward as well. But I'd love to talk with you too in the remaining minutes we have about what we can do next, and if it's possible for us to use the meeting that we have next actually to do this convening. Could we invite OSSE, DCPS, Public Charter School Board, everyone to come and actually talk about teacher retention together in a facilitated way?
I think that's a great idea. The only caveat I have is, will we get any answers?
Well, it's not, I don't know if it's answers at the forum, Fraser, I'm just realizing you weren't at the forum because your election was later. Because it was right when I joined the board, but what Scott was talking about was this forum.
I came to it, but I wasn't there for very long.
Oh, okay, so you were there. But I think
Was
it's,
it at Roosevelt?
I don't remember. I don't think so. But anyway, I think that it's a starting point, not an ending point, right? Like a starting point of having the conversation of how do we get on the same page? Is that possible? You know, and sort of talking through, I think my question too of like, here's a list of some of the things, you know, that the teacher facing organizations and agencies have been recommending or pushing for. What do we do first, second, third, or do we need to really like start working on these a little bit simultaneously, you know, all of them simultaneously? Anyway, go on, Alistair.
Yeah, no, I agree. I agree. And I would love if we could facilitate it so we spend less time talking about the problem, which I think we know, right? Because if we only have an hour, would love for the conversation to focus on who
I
takes
think-
what piece of the solution.
I would suggest it
agree
be more than an
completely.
hour. It's got to be more than an hour if it's a forum. I mean, I
My fear
think
is that if it's more than an hour, people won't come
you think.
because it's so tight right now.
Can we have it live?
We can, if you'd like.
Yeah. I'd
Hi,
like to-
Hello.
It would be wonderful if it could be live, and I would say you really can't do anything in less than 90 minutes. I mean, you know, people are going to introduce themselves, and I think then you have a full hour to actually do something. But I mean, I think this is, if, like Scott said, this is so critical. And I think if we frame it the way you posed it, Alistair, of this is about
Solution.
students.
Solutions, not problems.
Yeah, it's about solutions. We know the problems, but also that it's about what students, not just what they deserve, it's what they absolutely need now more than ever, that stability, that ability to, you know, feel like they're moving ahead. I think if you frame it like that, it does have that urgency. Everybody knows this is really urgent right now. It's just, nobody has revealed the numbers yet, you know, but
They have the numbers.
they have them and they know, you know, they know. So,
And it's not just a DCPS problem, it's a charter problem too.
oh
right?
yeah,
So,
and it's probably not a
I
DC
think-
problem. It's like a,
right.
And it's probably a unique kind of problem with the charters because of the, just, if you think about it, just because of the pay scales
yeah.
that the teachers have in charters as opposed to DCPS.
Anyway, yeah. So
I wonder if Mr. Goldstein would be open to, I'm just thinking out loud with you both now, facilitating our next meeting,
he would.
right? Where it's,
Oh, that's not a
we
problem.
bring
No,
folks
of
in,
course he would.
and you know, we know each other. We don't need an explanation of you know, what OSSI is to take up 15 minutes, right? I think we do quick round of intros when we frame it that way, right? We have limited time, would love to get straight to the solutions. Here are the recommendations that SBOE has laid out over the years, what, you know, the advocacy orgs have laid out over the years. You know, what are each of you doing about each of these recommendations, and where is their overlap, and how can we do more? I would love that kind of conversation because I don't think there has been another outlet to look at where the overlap has been or kind of find nodes of collaboration to actually work on those together. But that's my take on what we as SBOE can do, right?
How about this as a recommendation? I know you're not gonna believe this coming from my mouth. Is OSSI facilitates it.
Say more. Like, so why?
I mean,
OSSI?
we go in with an agenda of solutions, but OSSI is the facilitator of it. The reason I'm saying that is they may look at Scott as an adversary.
I think OSSI does. I think, yeah, I don't know, but I hear what you're saying. I think that Can
we
we?
have a new superintendent,
Well, maybe the first question is, can we get some staff help? I'm looking at you, Caitlin and John Paul and Darren,
Darren,
to see if we could invite some who, like, get your help to find who's working on teacher retention issues within those agencies, invite them to come, who's like most adjacent to that to come to the next meeting. If only 3 organizations say yes, let's still do it. If everyone's busy, let's find another time, right? But I do think that the broad framing is, and Fraser, I appreciate the urgency before that meeting in December, right? We would like to get feedback from the different agencies so that we can at least provide some kind of advisory to council before that meeting. That isn't just the 8-9 of us thinking about what, but actually getting feedback from the other agencies when we put that advisory together. I would love to see something like that. And to me, that feels productive from our role, but I'm newish still.
You don't look newish.
So one concern is that, agencies, if they feel like they are not working on this, would they be open to coming to this forum? So I think framing is important. And maybe we need to frame it in terms of working on solutions together, as opposed to, what are your solutions? What are you working on?
And I think this question that Paula Roth, thank you for putting in the chat, is asking is a big piece of this, right? And I don't know if we can elevate you to speak about this, but how included do the community-based organizations currently feel in finding the solution as the current status quo, right? Because part of for me why a convening like this would actually be really powerful is to specify the gaps that we currently have in the solution, and then ask to CBOs to help, right, in a much more organized and strategic fashion, and to get feedback on what the different agencies should be working on to help. And I don't know, Representative Gascoigne, if it's so much I don't want it to be reprimanding the different agencies for
No,
No, not at all.
not at all. But that's what I
all
don't
agree
want it
this
to
is
come
a big
across that
problem.
way. Yeah,
How are we all thinking about it differently? Are we even using the same vocabulary words to
right.
describe this, right?
We have to ask for
If
their
it's-
help. That's what we want.
Yeah.
We want their assistance in keeping teachers, period. What can we do to help you? Because we are, we're the State Board of Education, which encompasses both DCPS and DCPCS. And it's not working. How can you help us make it work?
And without many statutory powers, I will say, let's really lean into our convening powers, right? That puts a lot more staff time on Mr. Hayworth's team. So I would actually, Mr. Hayworth, if you or your colleagues are there, would love your feedback on what we're discussing.
Yeah, certainly we're here to monitor and assist the state board. So if this is what the committee would like to do, we can certainly adjust the work plan to accommodate that. It's possible that we may need to adjust some other things on the work plan. So other things may have to fall away in order for us to do something big like this. I think there are probably some additional discussions that need to be had amongst the committee on exactly how we're moving forward with this. What are we doing about these types of things? I would think that the likelihood of having agencies come to an open meeting to discuss their processes internally is not very high. But I think what we might be able to do is say, hey, we've been talking about this for a while. You've been talking about this. You've, released these teacher things, these teacher data memos. You understand it's an issue. Is there a way for us to come together and talk about that and try to figure out how do we, what supports are needed for you? What supports are needed for LEAs? What supports are, how do we have this larger conversation in a positive way? And maybe that's the idea of this conversation, is like, we'd like to structure a conversation.
That's interesting, and that's very different than I was thinking. So that way it would be more of a listening, right? We convene the educators to come talk to us about what support they need, and
I was meaning specifically agencies, not educators.
Okay.
John Paul, is since there are 4 people on the committee, does that mean it has to be public?
We have made a decision that all of our committee meetings are public. And that's largely for avenues of transparency, for the public to be able to see these meetings, to participate in these meetings and understand what's going on. And part of the reason being is that the president serves as ex officio member on all committees.
Oh, right.
And so since there is a potential that there could be 5 members, we do always notice and our meetings and make them public, available to the public.
Thank you, Representative Thompson. It's really good to see you. I have to jump.
Me too.
I'll catch up with you folks, and Mr. Hayworth, I may give you a call and see where I can help the team.
Ebony Rose, welcome. You've just taken Alistair's place.
No worries. I didn't know if you were still going to be on, but I figured I would try.
We had I don't know what time, are we finished with time? Are we over time?
Yeah, I have to jump.
What time is it?
It's over.
Oh,
Just, we were waiting for you. So now that you're here, we can say goodbye. But anyway,
just before we dismiss, Scott Goldstein gave a very good presentation, and the information he has from DCPS is that the numbers of teachers that have left the system is higher than it's been in a long time. And there are 160 vacancies since the beginning of school. So the people have left since the beginning of school. We're not talking about the people that left from last year to August.
Okay, I'll go back and watch, because I know they're all.
And he did a slide presentation.
Yeah, I know they're all posted, so I can go back and watch. Does he have information that we don't have? Does Scott magically have access?
He must have talked to somebody at DCPS that told him that.
Oh, okay.
We don't have any information.
Okay.
No, I'm not saying that,
yeah.
We're always the last ones to find out information.
No, I mean, yeah, in the words of my mom, the same thing that'll make you laugh.
What we were talking about was to have a meeting, to hopefully have a meeting with some of the leads in the agencies to let them know how they can help us. Not talk about problems, but talk about solutions.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see that when you watch the recording, I guess.
Okay.
All right. So thank you so much, everybody. And we'll see you next week, if not sooner.
You mean we'll see you on Friday at the retreat?
Friday at the retreat. That's right.
Where is the retreat?
It's at 441 4th Street.
Oh, okay.
1 to 4, right?
I think it's actually 1 to 5, but yeah, we'll send the agenda out again.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah, please do, because Ebony Rose was going to wind up at.
I remember the question of like, what could it be in person or not, and all this stuff. Look, I am on my last leg these days. This is literally the busiest time of year for me, and so I am.
Is it because of the budget?
What budget?
I don't know.
How about we go ahead and end this meeting and we can talk about the retreat another time?
Yeah,
Okay.
we can talk about anything another time. Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Guys.